Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Flip Side. Every Monday, we host an episode of either mindset or anything about real estate. And it's always the first Monday of every month, we'll talk about mindset. And every other Monday after that, it's any topic in real estate. My name is Diana Lizarazo, and today's guest speaker is Melissa. Now, before we get started, I want to share some exciting news with you. I have a social networking platform for the real estate investing industry. If you are an investor, if you are a mentor, or you are a professional, you want to be a part of this platform because it is transforming the way we work in real estate. And to get so it's REI FAM, and that's realestateinvestorfam.com. So you can go there, download the app, and get started, have fun, enjoy communicating with others, see what events are going on. Everyone's events anyone can put events in there, so it's a lot of fun. Get involved, be around the right kind of people, and get started, or just meet new people. Now back to the show. On the flip side, we talk about any topic, and today we are going to be hitting some great topics in property management. So we want to be able to mitigate those kind of problems that come up. So if you guys are ready to bring on Melissa, send me some hearts, send her some fire, send her anything you want. So let's just welcome her on the stage. Let's see. So I'm gonna go live. There we go. I want to give her a minute to come on. I'm just going to make sure it shows. And let me know, Melissa, if you see it. Uh, yeah, let me know if you see the request. I did send it. Yeah, it's been invited. Just let me know. Just say yes or whatever. I hope you see the message. Oh, okay, she requested. We both need to request. I don't know. I guess she didn't see it. Instagram is still having its problems, it looks like. Great. Okay, let me do that. Invite. I'm just going to cancel over here mine. Oh, I think, did we get it? No? Okay, hold on. Let me start it ringing again. While we wait for that, let me know, guys, what type of deal. Oh, we're here. There we go. Hey, Melissa.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great.
Happy to have you on. I think this is a great topic that we're having today. And just before we get started, let's just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself. So, how long have you been in the real estate investing industry? How long have you been in the property? Whatever you'd like to share.
Sure, thank you. So, I've been a real estate investor for a little bit over a decade, and a couple of years ago, I opted to, as part of my own portfolio expansion plans, to open up a property management company and manage for a third party. I didn't leave my career in banking around that time, so my sole focus is real estate investment and property management. And in a nutshell, that brings us to where we are today.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think that's great that you see both sides because you do invest, so you understand already all the problems that come with that, and then you have the property management, which even I think I really like even more because not only you're dealing with your properties, but you deal with other people's properties, so you have a wide range of, let's say, other investors where we only have our select, right? So you probably get to see a lot more things. And so with that being said, just tell us like what are the kind of tasks, what kind of things property management companies take care of, or even kind of things they can invest in themselves if they do it on their own. Like what kind of things involves property management?
Okay, so we are a full service property management company. We also are licensed for condo management, but that's a little bit different. I'm going to focus on the properties because that's mostly for our investors that would be watching today. So, full service property management means that we cover everything from leasing and finding, securing, screening tenants, managing tenants while they're in the building and renting from you. We also oversee any maintenance. So if there's anything that comes up, maintenance related, we would handle that as well too, and all the way up until the point where a tenant, let's say, may exit a property and consult with the owner as well. So we handle everything really. What we don't get involved in is if there's a sale of the property, for example. We're not involved in real estate sales, but we do have partners that if someone's looking to purchase or to sell, that we would connect them to if needed.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And yeah, it's really good to have someone like that or a business like that because it's almost end to end. And because even if you also deal with or you have legal helping with eviction process or anything related to that set, right? That you guys also deal with that too, right?
Absolutely. And property management involves all the good and all the bad. So we often, I mean, the majority of tenants are fine. They're wonderful, they're good, they're secure in their homes, we take care of things, everything's okay. But there are sometimes problems that occur with tenancies, and we actually get a lot of referrals from a legal team who, of course, knows that we have confidence in being able to handle those kinds of situations. And also a lot of owners who maybe have tenants that are a little bit more challenging to deal with day to day, or the owners simply don't have time. And so they reach out to us so that we can handle all of that on their behalf. So when it comes to legal issues, we do have a number of legal partners that we work with to handle things in terms of paperwork and actual hearing. And but everything that leads up to that, we do take care of ourselves.
Yeah, that's great to have so that you have, especially like that, like the different types of paralegals that are needed to be able to get that done because I think that quick movement to getting things done quickly helps so much to just especially like that, like a landlord able to try to go through the quick, let's say eviction process quick or just find something. You don't even have to get to the LTV because you have something behind you that just like helps makes that a lot faster.
I mean, it can be really challenging right now because unless we're able to resolve it prior to having to go through the eviction process, unfortunately, there's actually nothing fast about it. It can take a few to several months to get to a hearing, and that's the case whether it's a non-payment issue in terms of rent or utilities, or if it's a behavior issue or actions of the tenant at the property that are causing problems for other people. And so really the value of having property management in place in a situation like that is that we do have established processes and procedures around documenting what's happening so that if the matter cannot be resolved by the time it gets to a hearing, that I would say that our legal team is very, very successful in obtaining orders that can ultimately correct the problem. And that's really important because the wait is so long, really.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like you try to do anything and everything to avoid going to the LTV.
Nobody wants to, right? And the reality is that landlords don't want to have to evict people. No one wants to deal with these issues. Nobody wants to lose their home because of a problem. So we really do what we can to resolve it before it gets to that point. But some of them do, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And the how you get there does matter. So
Hmm. I agree. And actually, that's a good point that you're making. When you have, and maybe if you can give a scenario, I mean, help explain it is when you've had dealt with an eviction, because I think it kind of goes with you're a little bit with the paralegals getting involved, and you're also getting involved, like you said, or Justin, I don't know, to be able to, let's say, not go to LTV and to try like you said, resolve it before making it to that point.
yeah, so what we do, for example, with a non-payment, if someone's fallen behind on their rent or their utilities, then we do try to understand why and come up with a payment plan that works for them. We do try to connect them with rent help resources within the community. If it's Niagara or Hamilton areas, there are some agencies that can help someone who's run into a tough spot. And we want to really determine if the tenancy is viable, right? If the person doesn't have the ability to maintain their rent payments for whatever reason, then we want to try and come to a resolution that keeps the landlord as whole as possible, and also helps prevent the tenant ending up with an eviction record, right? So those are a little bit easier to deal with. You're dealing with finite amounts, right? It's dollars and cents at the end of the day. Where it becomes really challenging is if there are issues not related to payments, behavioral issues. Getting cooperation from someone who doesn't want to cooperate can be really tough. And ultimately, if you have to get...
Oh, sorry, you're muted right now. Sorry, can you say that again? I guess you had a call come in because you got muted for that moment. So you're saying specifically related to if there's behavioral issues, that
Yeah, so if there's a behavioral issues, again, what's bad enough to warrant an eviction process or ultimately be awarded an eviction? And that can be really tough because you're often dealing with one tenant who maybe has an issue with another one. For example, loud noise, that could be subjective. What's loud enough to say my landlord can and should be evicting this person? It's not always easy. And so we have a complaint process that we work through, that if somebody does have a complaint about another tenant in the building, that we utilize so they can document what that is, so that we can then again review with legal and say, okay, does this meet the test or threshold to go down that road here? And of course we try everything else we can to resolve it, but sometimes it simply can't be, and you have to do that. So and that's the part where we find that we actually have a really great success rate when you do have to push it that far. And it's also the part that we find that a lot of small landlords are struggling with or challenged with because they're not quite sure how to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And and so when these kind of things happen, do you automatically, or is it the paralegal automatically send an N form, or is an N form kind of like the last resort to, let's say, for example, like behavioral intervention, for example?
With everything, we try to resolve it without an N form. So an N form is a notice to end the tenancy, either for non-payment or for damage or behavior issues, things like that. So we try to resolve it without that. Sometimes it's more around, we need to lay the ground rules and make sure it's really, really clear to the tenant that this is not acceptable, whatever that is, right? So within the week or two of the issue occurring, we generally speaking want to be in a position where we're prepared to have that N form prepared and issued by the paralegal, because they're really the best qualified to do those. And then we kind of support throughout that process. So we continue trying to resolve the issue. If it's non-payment or if it's a behavior or damage issue, we still work to resolve that with the tenant if we can, prior to a hearing happening. Because by the time you get there, you want to demonstrate to the adjudicator, to the vice chair, that you've done everything you can up to this point. Eviction is the last resort, but an eviction is a reasonable under the circumstances, and they should be granting it, right? So, and that's where we work really closely with the legal team, is they do the legal part of it, and we do all like the soft skills piece of it to try and resolve the issue, to prevent that eviction or to get it fixed, right? Sometimes we're successful, and sometimes the tenant will not or cannot cooperate for whatever reason, and we have to see that through.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. That was like a lesson that I learned. Because I did go to a paralegal, go to an eviction, but for some reason I thought to create the N form myself. The thing is, it became complicated because of the friend, so we ended up actually like to help him out. We thought he would try to start making the payments, and it was just not really the case. But we tried, so we were like, okay, you know what? This is the basement, so we're planning to make that a legal unit anyways. So like, give it to us, renovate, fix it, and then we reduce your rent, and then you can keep the unit. Um, we didn't realize because we did that and we reduced the rent, that in the form we submitted, we said that we just gave the address of the whole house, and then so we spent, I think it was like 3 months before the lawyer, before we went, or the paralegal like looked at it, I guess, questioning it. And then he was like, "You did why?" He's like, "Why are these differences? You could see like the rent was like higher and then it got lower." And he starts, digging in. And that's when he was just like, "Oh no, you have to do this again." And we're just like, "Oh, we just wasted 3 months and didn't realize it." So I feel like that's such an part of what? Property management, because you guys know it and have been doing it with working together with paralegal, but also having that paralegal and even just sharing all the information, because for some reason I didn't think to share that until obviously this questioning to just kind of put everything together. And it was something that I was like, oh, why did I do that? You know? Whereas like, and that's where I learned that he can submit the N form. I, for some reason, thought that they just dealt with the L form. I didn't think that they would do it the N form. So like, oh, whatever, I'll submit it and then like I'll get a paralegal prepared for everything else. So
And it,
whereas I know you
it's
guys
pretty
would have just
tricky.
done it from the very beginning properly.
Yeah, and that's the case where there's some different moving parts to it. You know, even things that seem a little bit more clear cut can still be a little bit challenging. So, um, the dates that you have to do things are really, really important. And I have to be super clear. I'm not a licensed legal rep. I'm not allowed to act as one, give legal advice, any of that. Okay. There's very clear case law that states that's the case because I'm not licensed. But you have to be really attentive to the details, and we have some amazing legal talent out there that handles specifically cases before the LTB, and they're exceptionally busy, right? So it really does take a team to pay attention to the details and make sure that you're volunteering as much information as you can, even if maybe you don't think it's relevant, so that the legal representative can look at it and say, yes, this is relevant, or no, it's not, and take that into consideration with how they handle things, because it's only as good as what questions you know to ask and what information you know to volunteer. And in a situation like that, I mean, it might not necessarily come up until it's too late, right?
Exactly.
And you're like, oh shit,
Exactly.
okay.
Thank God at least it wasn't like when the actual court hearing was like done and then it was or like there and they tell you and then then you're collecting information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that being said, actually, because I feel like that's kind of in itself a cost savings is why you should have property management because they know it. Any if you have any other tips on why even hire a property manager, what kind of what kind of help do you provide in the sense of saving money? Because I feel like especially lots of people always think like, oh my getting a property management in, but then again, there's lots of benefits for having the property management, and even a property management can improve the cost savings for the landlord.
Sure. There are a couple things that come to mind. One is that as a company, so a smaller landlords, they're going to be dealing with a much smaller scale of things. So they might not have certain systems, process, scalability of how certain things get done. So through a property management company, they should have that, which results in a better experience for the landlord in terms of organization and things that I mean, they get it by paying for property management, but they don't have to go out and like single source it for themselves and incur all these extra costs, or maybe it's simply not cost effective for them because they're dealing with a certain number of units and not maybe hundreds of units as an example. The other one that I think is really important is a person's time, right? And I can speak to a little bit coming from being a small landlord myself and transitioning into property management for third parties. When I look at how I would spend my time before and what I can now delegate, let's say, to staff, the same thing applies to our clients, right? They simply don't have to take those calls when they're eating dinner with their family. They can use that time to go do something else, acquire more properties, spend time with their kids, put their focus on their career, whatever that might be. And so every minute or hour of a person's time that they have to take going to do something is still time spent, right? And it's a little tougher to put a dollar amount on that, but I can say that having been the person who used to have to do everything, I would say that having the property management company handling things, even though, yes, I own the property management company, it's a lot better organized, a lot more streamlined, a lot cleaner, and it also gives me time back because I don't have to do everything myself, right? And so I think that our clients really get the benefit of that as well too. And in addition to that, our team also has a lot of experience. So we're dealing with leasing all the time. We're dealing with tenant issues all the time. And so that breadth of experience really makes it a lot easier or simpler to deal with issues because we just kind of know what we have to do. We don't have to go search and find that. If you're a small landlord, you have to go and try and figure out, how do I handle this? With a property management company, you shortcut that. You just have to have a team that knows how to handle it.
That definitely that experience is invaluable. I think it's just so important because, like you said, it's like the time that you cut. And I think even let's talking as a sense of investors, uh, even as investors, sometimes, like for example, for me, I'm not really like I know some properties and they're tenanted, but I can't say that's like my favorite part of the investing part. I actually love the whole flipping part or like finding solutions to a property that be it a flip or whatever it is, but finding those solutions and and then just thinking where does it make more sense to put my time and my money today? And so even something like that, I'd be like, property management would be better work. I don't really like want to think about my property. That's also one of the reasons why I do long term tenants because I kind of want it to be just doing its own thing and I don't want to think about it. I want to be thinking about the things that I enjoy and I have a lot of fun with. And so even I think in that sense, usually it's like just seeing like where your time is being spent in the sense of projects and be like, you know what, I'd rather spend it in another place that's things that I enjoy compared to maybe, for example, like me, not that I don't like it, but it's something that I don't really like. It's not like it's no fun things out there for me.
Yeah, and I hear that from others as well too, where we've had a chat with someone about property management. They opt to self-manage for a while, and then they come back and they say, "I love being an investor. I do not want to be the landlord. Can you deal with this?" Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
because they've had to take the calls, and I remember one client specifically. We placed the tenants for her. She was going to self-manage, and the first phone call she got for a maintenance thing, she says, "You know what? I really don't want to be dealing with this." And she just turned it right over to us and we managed it and took care of it ever since. And that's simply what she wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that works well for a lot. There are some people who really want to be hands-on and with their investments, and there's definitely some pros to that as well, right? And it's just at what point do you determine you either have a greater volume to deal with where you have to now pick and choose where you spend your time. Do I spend my time growing my portfolio, or do I spend my time dealing with tenant phone calls and complaints and nonsense because the thermostat's 1 degree off? Like where do you spend your time, right? So
100%. And I think even as an investor and landlord, I think it's all in also how you pick the property managers and the expectations that you set. And I'm finding a good property manager, but I think when you find a good property manager, you're kind of already looking for certain qualities. Because I can hear you the same thing. Like for example, like specifically just being involved in doing that last review of the tenants to make sure it is qualified. They can qualify for what my requirements are. But that being said, I would also want to tell my property manager, don't even send me things that are like, or the other way around, like make sure that they meet these criteria before it even comes to me. Um, because in that way, it's like you know what the criteria is that you have to meet. And me as the investor, I'm at least setting these like guidelines for what are my expectations on the property and the property itself, other things too, um, just to make it easier. And I think in these ways you're starting to find like the right property managers because I feel like in anything you do, uh, you can find the bad apples and there's always good apples out there. It's like you gotta do that proper vetting process to even make sure and the vetting and the communication. Like in property management, the communication between your tenant is so important. But even the same thing from the landlord or the investor to the property management company is also important. And I think it makes us feel also if we're communicating, what we want to feel good and it makes it easier for you to do your job too.
yeah, it sounds like communication would be a simple thing, but it's not always the case, right? It's something that we are continually trying to do better at always. One of the things to kind of think of is that while and I know a lot of great property managers or those that are running property management companies. There are some really great options out there, but I think one thing that really can come as a challenge, especially when you're dealing with individual owners, is that you know, in order to run the company effectively and to be able to keep on top of everything we need to do, we need to standardize as much as possible. We need to follow the same thing for everyone. And sometimes different people have different expectations, right? And so how do you kind of work out how you're going to handle things and cater to give your clients like reassurance? So if I'm a landlord, I want to know my property manager is doing their job. Do I need to know every single little thing? No, that's kind of counterproductive to having a property manager, but there's certain things that I'm going to want to know, right? And so the threshold that we set is that if there's something that you need to be aware of, for example, a potential legal issue brewing, or hey, we might have to bring in legal on this, or we might have to, you know, hire someone on your behalf. We need to have your input as to who you would like to represent you for this. Yes, of course, we're going to reach out to our owners, but for the most part, we try to keep it self-serve in terms of access to documents. So if you need a copy of your lease or inspections or stuff, you can access that on demand. And then if you have questions, you know, to be able to reach out and to get some responses on that. And it's not perfect. There are some really big, large property management companies well established with how they do things. Then you've got single property managers who might be one person and an assistant who handles everything. And then you have companies that are a little bit more in the mid-range, which is something like ours, in which case we're still developing that kind of thing and trying to streamline it as much as possible and get things as right as possible so that, you know, our clients can have that reassurance, right? Because I think we've all heard the stories of property managers who've not done a good job. For whatever reason, right? And so we want to make sure that we're on top of that as much as possible.
100% agree. And yeah, it's important to have that communication. But like you said, I mean, I feel like it is the hardest part. No, even like that, like I thought I'm telling my paralegal all the information until he goes through these things, and then all of a sudden he's asking me questions, and I was like, oh my god. I was like, why didn't I tell you this? Why didn't I think this is important? You know?
Yeah, and I mean, transparency is really important. I don't think that there's a question that a person could ask that we wouldn't be able to explain, here's exactly how we do this or how this is supposed to be done every time. And to have those kinds of answers, right? Especially if there's a legal issue that's going on, that, you know, we can come into that prepared. And when the paralegal is asking these details, we should have most, if not all of that at our fingertips to be able to prepare them to succeed at their hearing. Now, in the case of a situation where there's not like a unit number on a document, that's a pretty big issue, because if that gets all the way to a hearing and they want to issue an order, a sheriff can't show up to evict somebody. They're not going to know which unit to go to. Not only do you need to have it identified on there, the adjudicator wouldn't even issue the order, but not only would you need to have it identified on there, you need your units labeled. Right?
Mm.
You know, like, and it seems like a simple thing, but somebody needs to know that, right? And I've talked to investors who've had situations where the sheriff has shown up and said, I can't execute on this order because I don't have it labeled which unit I'm evicting, therefore I'm not going to. It seems like a simple thing, but this kind of stuff happens, right? And that's where the big thing that I see is a difference coming from being just an investor to an investor and managing other parties, is that we have such a volume that we deal with that I get exposure to all these different situations where I would not have if I was just handling my own properties, right? So, you know, the more you do, the more you learn, and that's where property management is valuable for someone, is that they should have that experience, right?
Yeah, because like you said, I mean, I feel like there's always going to be, I'm sure even with your experience, you probably here and there, maybe not as often as, let's say, newer investors, or like as in not the investors that don't have as many properties, but I'm sure even you probably still see different scenarios here and there where you haven't encountered. So imagine like us, you know, where we don't have as many properties to manage.
I'm learning all the time. I mean, I'm always learning something new, or there might be, you know, if there's new cases that are heard over situations, for example, regarding snow and lawn care and stuff, that, or if someone's supposed to move and they don't. I mean, I was just on the phone with legal this morning discussing an issue that we've had come up with a tenant, and said, you know, what do you recommend we do in this case because it's not really clear to me, and I have that experience, right? And even the paralegal says, well, you know, it could go this way, it could go that way. Here's what I recommend you do. Here's what you can try. It's not going to be concrete. So even someone with that, those two things coupled with all of that experience and knowledge specifically dealing with landlord-tenant issues, sometimes we're still stumped. I learn all the time, and I think the biggest thing is that it's okay to not be sure. Just seek out the best answer that you can, and what is reasonable under the circumstances, and what's ultimately going to get the job done for whatever it is that you're trying to deal with, right? And but I learn all the time, and I expect that I'll continue to learn, right? There's always going to be something else you haven't run into before.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like you said, and even sometimes, because I've had the same situation where I've spoken to my paralegal and we're together, like trying to figure out the best solution to get something done. So it's true. Sometimes, I don't know, somehow, like it's, I guess, so many different ways to do things that. What is it? I feel like, what is the, let's say the biggest thing, I don't know if that's the biggest thing, but let's say even something that you've seen, like you said, there's something that you learned that you had never experienced before.
Something that I hadn't experienced before. I mean, I think the biggest issue is when you're dealing with safety problems within the complex. So for example, we just had a hearing on, there was someone who started a fire in a building, right? It was a multi-unit building. You would think that these things would be quick to get resolved. We applied, so, and I say we, I mean the legal team, they applied for a request to shorten the time, basically stating that not only did this tenant and or his guests start a fire in a multi-unit building, but there were continued break and enters into the property after that occurred. That was an ongoing safety issue. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned and that I've been reminded of when these kinds of things do happen is that nothing is going to be quick. And you have to really work on reassuring other tenants in the building that you're doing everything you can. Sometimes you can tell them that and they don't believe you and or they don't care, right? What do you mean? You know, it's they're trying to understand, what is my landlord doing to resolve this issue? And we're trying to retain good tenancies in the building, while also, like, there's certain things you can do and certain things you can't do. I mean, I can't prevent this tenant, former tenant, from showing up to the building. What we can do is we can ask the legal team to try and expedite a hearing. But this expedited situation still took 6 or 7 months to resolve. How is that acceptable for other tenants to live under that cloud of maybe this guy can return to the property and we can't do anything to stop it? The police can't really stop him. All they can do is, you know, show up maybe when called and try to speak with him while he's there. But at the end of the day, there's no real satisfactory resolution to a situation like that. And when you have to deal with problems like that all the time, you know, you kind of get used to, here's what I can do and here's what I can't do. But the tough part is trying to support other tenants through it and support landlords through it and have everyone know that, you know, you really are doing everything that you can, but there's just only so far that's going to go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very, very, very true. Especially, yeah, and that's, you're basically dealing with everyone at the same time, right? It's like trying to keep everyone calm and and at the same time trying to get that problem tenant to just like stop their behaviors.
Absolutely. And it's easier said than done, right? And so that's a bit of more of a serious case where there was, you know, the fire and the break and enters, but even in cases of noise back and forth, or if someone has guests at the property that another resident is not a fan of, I mean, again, it's, the police are very reluctant to step in situations like that because, you know, quite frankly, they've been in situations where they've been sued before, or they just simply say, no, let the landlord tenant board resolve it. The problem is that the board is so backlogged that it takes a long time to resolve. And that affects landlords, it affects other tenants. And, you know, as property management, we're kind of in the middle. I don't want to say caught in the middle. It's literally our job to deal with stuff like this, but we're trying to navigate this forward and keep everyone happy. And the reality is that probably nobody's going to be happy at the end of the day, but there's only so much you can do, much like for a legal team, right? When you have a paralegal involved, there's things they can do and things they can't do. They can't do anything to expedite a hearing aside from file for it. Um, they don't control the board process. They don't control a lot of things. What they do control is, issuing the paperwork, making sure it's correct, and handling the hearing when it happens. But everything else, they can't really do much about, right? So.
Yeah, 100%. That was a great tip to hear because, or even just understanding, I would say more of like the types of things that happen because it is true. I've never actually done it from the tenant side, but as a property manager or even as a landlord, but imagine as a landlord, like you're trying to manage your other tenants. You're trying to manage your own feelings, like you said, right? Because you yourself are probably just like as a landlord getting so irritated with the situation. And then trying to deal with the fact that you're trying to go to LTV to try to get this done. It's a lot, and like you said, it's like that motivation, trying to like keep the fort going and not piss people off themselves. Who knows? I mean, I don't know if that was it, but even I can just see, you know, tenants. Like if one tenant annoys the other, um, it can just go downhill so quickly. People get so revengeful between each other, and it's just like this tit for tat game, and it gets bigger and bigger. And you're there as a property manager or a landlord, trying to cool them down. But sometimes they just get. We had a situation where one of our tenants just like was done, and went into this like crazy revenge, crazy through it to her tenant, and she's like the other tenants, and in the end, finally got like left on her own. But it was just a very stressful 3 4 months of just like figuring out what are we gonna do because this person is like almost gone nuts on us, just because of like the tension and stress that she was going through. Plus, everything just started bothering her about the place, and I'm just like, oh god.
And it's tough. There's some things you can do something about, and there's other things that you simply can't, right? So, when there's noise disturbances in between tenants upstairs and downstairs, let's say you're dealing with a duplex. The reality is that if you have a forced air gas furnace in the house, then there's going to be ductwork in between the units, and sound is going to carry between them. And there's quite frankly nothing you're going to do to eliminate that. Some people are very sensitive to noise, and so it might bother one person a lot more than the other, and it can be challenging to deal with that, and to reassure one tenant you're doing everything you can, and then the other one might say, well, I feel harassed because I can't live in my home, I can't walk on the floor without getting yelled at by the other tenant. And how do you deal with that, right? And so how we deal with it is we try to understand what is happening. We encourage tenants where they can to record to capture the noise so we can figure out, is this something that's abnormal or not, right? Maybe it's just normal living noise and the person's sensitive, or maybe it's really out of control and we need to do something about it. How do you know when you don't live there, right?
Yeah,
So
that's a very good point.
yeah, and it can be a little subjective, or there might be special considerations where a person says, well, one of my children is autistic and they're very sensitive to noise because they have sensory issues. Okay, now maybe you're in a duty to accommodate where you have to do everything you possibly can to accommodate that child's special needs, right? Again, as an average landlord and a small landlord in the world that we're in today, with rising repair costs and interest rates and all the things you have to contend with, it can feel really burdensome to have to deal with tenants in that kind of situation, and also try to figure out, like, how do I resolve this, right? It's tough, and that's where it can even weigh on a person emotionally to say, I'm constantly getting these calls from my tenants about this, and I can't do anything about it. I just don't want any more of these phone calls, and that's where property management will deal with it, and at some point, the problem either gets resolved, somebody moves out, or sometimes tenant says, I don't think you're doing anything about it, dear landlord or property manager, I'm going to file against you with the board. That's very frustrating because you might have done everything that you can, but you still have to deal with it as a problem. And again, as property management, that's where we get in and deal with it on someone's behalf.
Yeah, I completely agree. Property management definitely does help reduce all those stresses because especially when there's multiple units involved.
Luckily now that's the only one we've dealt with. Again, we don't have very many units, but one that we dealt with where it was actually I guess it'd be two because we had two evictions. One was bad, the other one was like we were kind of nuts for like a couple months, personal stuff, and it's just like it's like that. Like even understanding that like when people have personal problems, and then like that, like everything just starts irritating, and pissing them off. Years of actually both my tenants are this way years of never having any problems. One goes in the extreme of like just not paying anything, just shutting down because again personal issues. But then it took into obviously now they didn't think that they need to pay us. I don't know, even though for some reason it was their personal issue. And the other one being that they went through personal issues and then they just started taking it out on the other tenants. And so it was just like this kind of thing can be so impactful and mentally draining as a landlord, or even sometimes, like a friend of mine, and you just kind of snap on them, and that makes it even worse. For you, it's like having that intermediary where it's kind of like you do because landlords will take things also very emotionally with their property and stuff, and sometimes even that is good, right? A property management is good for the fact of like they will leave the emotions out of it because they understand like this is a business and we just have to move the best we can forward and not, for example, get into that tit for tat. Because I've seen the landlord go through that tit for tat. Like the tenant sits on the landlord, and then all of a sudden the landlord, and they're just going back and forth, making their situation worse without even realizing it, just because it's like the emotion is getting too much for the landlord, and it's sometimes forget, especially with small landlords, you don't realize that you're still running a business, treat it like a business. It's not like don't freak out.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
treat it as a business.
and there are things that because I'm running a property management company now that we do and I do so much better than I did as a small landlord without property management in place, right? And that professionalism really does go a long way, and it helps to set some boundaries as well too. So, from a tenant perspective, if this is an emergency, if there's a fire or a flood or something really impactful, you can get a hold of someone 24 hours a day. We have a setup in place for that. But if it's not an emergency, we can contain it with the normal business hours, right? And we set those boundaries with people, and that's a lot harder to do when you're the small landlord who is self-managing and you have to answer every single call that comes through just in case, or you don't have those kinds of things set up to have those boundaries, right? And so
Or that emotional attachment to property people have sometimes, and you forget like that it's like you're renting it out, and yes, it's your business, it's your property, but at the time, just like releasing it in the sense of like thinking of it as a business.
And that's truly it. It really is a business. And I mean, we have a lot of, I mean, small landlords provide the bulk of private rental housing in Canada. So there's a lot of us out there, and many own one or two properties, and that's your financial future. And when you look at somebody, when you run into a difficult situation where someone's damaging your property or not paying your rent, I mean, I've seen that bankrupt people, right? It can be very hard as an individual person to separate yourself from that and say, oh, it's just a business. That sounds all fine and great to say it, but it's your livelihood. You've put a lot of work and time and effort into acquiring this property with the goal of, having a better financial future as a result of it. And then you run into a problem, and you run into a problem that can cost you a lot of money. And we have a board or things in place that are not very efficient to deal with those problems, right? That can be really hard. I mean, I've had those conversations with clients to say, this is a really difficult situation. Let us handle the day to day. You go make some money and pay your bills for this property so that you don't lose it, right? So we can just like help someone through that so they can put their head down and focus on what they need to, and then we can deal with that piece of it so that it can run as a business. And unfortunately, this is a part of it. Is there's lots of great benefits. I mean, I had a wonderful banking career before. I left that for a number of reasons that I won't get into, but I would say that investing in real estate has really facilitated that for me. And it's not without its challenges. There are some times that I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so stressed as an investor trying to keep on top of all the things that I need to do. But at the end of the day, we will kind of come out the other end of it. It's just head down, focused on what you need to, and the property management team will deal with all the day-to-day stuff. Well, again, I go focus on making those things better and contributing to my financial future. And so there's all these great benefits of it. And real estate's really done that for me. It does it for a lot of others. And property management's part of making that a success, really. And I really enjoy it and try to bring that knowledge and experience to our team here, where some of them are investors themselves, so they get it, and others are not, but they do need to understand the perspective. So we just want to make sure everyone else does, so that when it comes to taking care of our clients, they kind of know where they're coming from and can reassure them, so that, again, they can focus on other things instead of dealing with the day-to-day of their property.
I love everything you said. If people want to reach out to you or know more about your business and even what areas you serve, like to share that?
Sure. So we manage long-term rental properties from Fort Erie down through Niagara, up through Hamilton, all the way to Brantford, Brampton, Burlington. We're in that area. And we can do condo management from here all the way through to Toronto. We have a condo management company very well established that we partner with to offer that. Our website is Athena, ATHENAPMI.com. So that gives a lot of general information and things in terms of our listings and a little bit more about us as a company. And then I'm on social media as well too. So for myself personally, Melissa Dupuis on Facebook, and then Instagram's Eat, Sleep, Real Estate, Repeat, which of course everyone's watching this on today.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on. It was so great to hear what you have to say. So insightful. If you guys love what you heard from Melissa, she's going to be tagged on here. You also can check out our profile on REI FAM and learn even more about her in her profile there. And if you guys love what you heard from me, want to be up and know what shows are coming up or anything, you can definitely follow me too, and definitely can check me out on REI FAM too. Melissa, thank you so much. It was so much fun to chat with you. Bye, everyone. We'll see you all the next episode.